Hello everyone. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be covering areas, warps, and spawn points. So to begin with, what is an area? Well, every level that you make can be composed of multiple areas, each with their own different maps. So if you look, I'm in Cool Mountain right now in the original game. I'm just using Quad 64 right now because it lets you look around the original game very easily. So you'll see that there's no other area off to the side or anything in this map, but if you remember, if you jump into this chimney, you'll get taken to an entirely different place with the penguin slide race. So if I go to a select area, area 2, you'll see that there's this entirely different map that's also part of Cool Mountain, but yeah, different map entirely. This is the penguin, and this is the, this is the slide you race down. So let me show you making a second area for your level and other things from there. So here I am in ROM Manager, and I'm just going to open up my brand new ROM to mess around with. Oops, it got displaced a little bit. 64 ROM, here we go. This is the file. Opening up for the first time, and there we go. Now I can start editing it. So, as usual, I'm just going to replace Wobbump's Battlefield the level. And once again, nothing you haven't seen before in the previous tutorials, I'll be adding my first area. Though this time, I'm going to not add just a flat-out regular cube. I'm going to add a green-colored cube this time. And that's just so that I'll be able to show you very clearly when I go from one area to the next. It'll be very obvious. So anyways, I'll make that my area 1. And like before, I have to change the initial place I spawned from. This object, Warp Mario Start 1. I have to bring it out of my model, otherwise I'll just die instantly. So now I'm spawning above it, I'm all set. So this is a functional area 1. We've been here before, but now let's make an area 2. So I'll just add area again. This is how you get a second area. I'll make this cube red so that I can distinguish it from the first area. Now I'll load it in. My area 2 is here. Just like with my area 1, I want to make sure that the place I'm planning on spawning from, this Warp Mario Start 1 object, I need to make it so that it's not inside of something, otherwise Mario instantly dies. So now, I have my area 2. I theoretically have this place I can spawn from, this Warp Mario Start 1 object, but currently there's no way to actually get here, because if I open back up my area 1, I could run around all day on this cube, and there's no way to actually get to area 2. I don't have anything warping me over there. It's just impossible right now. So I actually have to create a warp to get to my area 2. So, to start off with, you need to make a new object. I'll select this empty object here. And you need to make it a certain kind of warp that lets you warp from it. Because this Warp Mario Start 1, you can warp to it just fine, but it's not the sort of object you can warp from. So, for the sake of this example, let's select a warp hole object. This is similar to the chimney that I was showing you in Cool Mountain, where if you walk into it, you'll just get warped instantly to somewhere else. So I'll drop it to the surface of my cube. Now I have an object I can warp from, but it's not quite this simple. There's some other steps. The first is that I actually have to give this object an ID, kind of a name. So if I click on my initial warp that brings me into this level, this Warp Mario Start 1, yeah, it's a warp object, you'll see that it already has an ID. The ID gets stored in behavior param 2, and by default it's set to 10. I want to make sure I don't repeat that ID for the object I'm newly making. So let me set its ID, but set it to be, just on a whim, whoops, 20. And just with any other object, I have to make sure it appears on all acts, or it just won't show up at all. So, that's one step closer. I've given it its name. I can now tell something, hey, I want to warp from this thing that has an ID of 20. But currently, nothing is set up to actually make that happen. Like, if I walked into this warp hole right now, where is it going to take me to? That's not set up at all. To get that taken care of, I have to create something that's a warp connection. And you do that by clicking this tab right here. You'll see that there's already a few warp connections here. You don't have to worry about them. I'll get to them later. For now, I have to create a new warp connection to actually connect this object that I just made to something else. So, I will click that button and it appears right here. And if I select it, you'll see there's a few parameters here that I have to take care of. So the first is this source place. This is where I want to be warping from. Remember, I made a connection. The connection doesn't know anything yet about any of my warp objects. It just was newly created and knows nothing about my level. First, I have to tell it, where am I connecting from? Where do I want to start my warp from? And I want to start it from this object right here that I just made, this warp hole. And if you remember, I gave it an ID of 20. So I should set the source where I want to start warping from to also be 20 to show that I want to warp from this warp hole object. Now the other thing is I have to determine where I'm warping to. That's taken care of in this destination section here. So I want to warp to Area 2 of Bob-omb's Battlefield, my level that's replacing Bob-omb's Battlefield. So for the destination area ID, what area number do I want to go to? I should type in 2. And you'll see that yes, I do want to still be warping to the level Bob-omb's Battlefield, because a level can have multiple areas, and I just want to be going to Area 2 of this Bob-omb's Battlefield level. So there's one last step. I have to set the warp ID of the destination as well. And it's not going to just be 0. So let me go to Area 2 to show you what it actually is. If I go to Area 2 and edit it, you'll see that this is my warp object. This is where I'm planning to warp to, this warp Mario Start 1. So if I go down, you'll see that it has an ID of 10. That's the same as the Warp Mario Start 1 ID of my other area, but IDs can sometimes be the same number if they're in different areas. You just want to make sure that they're not the same ID if they're in the same area. But anyways, this is my warp object I want to warp to, the Warp Mario Start 1 object of my Area 2. And I know it has an ID of 10, so that's what I'll have to feed in that place I was at just before. So let me go back to Area 1. I'll go back to my warp connection that I was in the middle of editing. And here, this is my destination warp ID. I just established that the value that is in this ID slot should be 10, because that's the ID of the warp object I want to go to, which is the warp that's in Area 2 of Bob-omb's Battlefield. So if I were to just save this, I should be able to open this in my emulator and go from my initial spawn point to the warp hole, which will then take me to my Area 2. Alright, so here I am. I'm loading my save file right now. It's just an existing save file. It already has a few stars, just so I can save some time and skip the intro. But if I go to my level that I've been mucking about with, which is the level that's replacing Bob-omb's Battlefield, I should see that if I go in and just select any act, I set everything to appear on all acts, it doesn't matter which one I select. if I walk to where that warp hole is supposed to be, which is down here, I should just be able to walk into it and get taken to my other area. So if I do just that, here I am in my area 2. Excellent. So that's the starting points of how to make a level with multiple areas. Or rather, it's the starting points for ROM hacking. You don't just want a level with one area necessarily. You want more space to run around in. You want to warp to other areas that look completely different. That's the sort of way that you do it. You add an area, and you'd add a warp to that area, as I just did. So now let me show you some other stuff in ROM Manager related to warps and spawn points. So here I am back in ROM Manager. So what I want to do is I actually kind of want to make a hub world, let's say. I want to make a place where I start off in and I can go from there to any of my other levels, such as Bobman's Battlefield. Sure, the castle is a nice hub of its own, but I want to make my own hub world. So, let's try replacing Castle Grounds. This is the place where Mario normally spawns in when you first load a save file. So if I replace this, Mario, when I load my save file, should appear right in this level. So let me take care of that. And I will add an area. To make it easily distinguishable from everything else, I'll make it a purple cube. So, like before, I'm just going to take my spawn points and drag it out of the cube because spawning inside the cube kills me. So I'll save my ROM, and in theory, when I load my save file, I should start right here, land on my purple cube, and everything should be great. Let's see if that actually happens. So here I am, I've loaded my ROM, and if I load my save file, you will see, whoops, I'm spawning in the area that has the purple cube, but I instantly died because I spawned right in the middle of it. Well, what gives? I changed the warp start 1 object position. It should have been above the cube. Why did I still die? Well, let me explain. So after just loading my ROM in, if I select Castle Grounds, the thing that's important is that when you first load a save file, you don't actually start at your Mario Warp 1 object. You start at some objects that are, at some coordinates that are hard-coded into the game. So if you're replacing something that is the area where Mario would initially spawn in when you load the game, you have to make sure that you change these hard-coded coordinates, and you do that by clicking this wrench right here next to the default start position. So if I just click it, you'll see 0, 0, 0. That's what it's currently set to. That's set to be directly inside of my cube. That's why I died. This is what I had to change, but it wasn't changed, so Mario just spawned in the cube and died. So how do I know what to actually change this to? Well, I can go into my area and just drag some random object about and figure it out. So if I select just some random empty object, I can drag it up to a suitable location. This should work just fine. This is above the cube. If I go to the coordinates of this object, I'll see 0, 930, 0. I can just use these coordinates. So, if I enter as the hard-coded coordinates 0, 930, 0, now this should work. This area that Mario initially spawns in when I load the save file, it has hard-coded coordinates that should take him above the model, and he should be able to live and just be fine. Let me show you. Alright, so here I am, about to load my save file. So if I select my save file right now, you'll see that I do, in fact, spawn right above my purple cube. I've successfully changed the coordinates that Mario spawns at when I load the game, so I was able to make him live. But this is a pretty sad-looking hub world. I'm not actually able to go to any of my levels, so let me just quickly add in something that will take me to my Bob-omb's Battlefield level. So here my ROM is loaded again. Let me add something that takes care of that problem I was having. So similar to using the warp hole, I actually need to add in another object that lets me warp from itself. So let me just take another empty object I can use. I need to drag it up to a suitable location, and this time let me make it a warp pipe. So if I go down to the warps, I will choose warp pipe right here. And let me drop it to the ground so it looks better. And now I can set the values for this to make it so that it serves as a warp object. You may think it looks very different. My other warp objects so far have been completely invisible, but this is an object related to warping, so it works really the same exact way. What that means is that, first of all, I should make it actually appear in every act, otherwise I won't even see it at all. But after that, I need to give it its own ID. So for this, I'm just going to give it an ID of 30, just some random value that isn't the same as one already being used. So now I've given this its name, and from here I can actually tell some warp connection to warp to or from this. Specifically, I'm going to have it warp from this. So I just create my new warp connection. I just mentioned that this has an ID of 30, so I should set this warp ID to be 30. This is where I'm warping from. The warp object with a warp ID of 30 in the current area, which is this pipe. So now, as I said, I want to go to my Bob-omb Battlefield level. So if I click that up there, I do want to warp to the first area, but I have to put something in this destination warp ID place. So let me save this and show you that once again, that's probably going to just be 10 because that's the default value for when you first create an area. You'll see that if I go to my warp Mario Start 1 object, which is where I will want to end up warping to, it does in fact have an ID of 10. So that's the ID I should be warping to. So going back to my castle grounds, I was almost done with that warp connection setup. The one last thing I have to do is, just change the ID to be 10 because that's the ID of the object I'm warping to. So if I save this, I should be able to start in my hub level, which is the level we're placing castle grounds, jump in this pipe and be taken to Bob-omb's Battlefield. So it didn't work, and I suspect that it's because ROM Manager can be just a little bit finicky sometimes. If I go back... off camera, I tried it out and it didn't work. But to show you why I suspect it didn't work, if I go to my warp connection, you'll see it didn't actually save that I set the destination warp ID to 10. It can be a little bit finicky, so if you go into your level and it doesn't work, check to make sure it didn't revert itself. So if you see that green flash, you're generally okay. I just hit enter right now and it let that work. So let me save that and try again. Alright, so here I am loading my save file. If I jump into the pipe, you'll see that sure enough, I'm taken to Bob-omb Battlefield, and if I select just any act, I get taken to my object that I decided to warp to. The object that had a warp ID of 10 in the level we're placing Bob-omb Battlefield in Area 1. Here I am. So now I've made it so that I can use a hub world to get to any of my levels. I could just put more warp pipes, for instance, in my castle grounds to go to other levels. But if I were to get a star or die right now, I wouldn't spawn back at my hub world, I'd just spawn back inside the castle. So, let me show you how to take care of this extra problem. So I'm going to decide to put a star in my Area 2 of Bob-omb's Battlefield. So I'll just go to the editor. I'm just giving myself a star to collect so that I can show you how I change what place I'll go to after collecting said star. So I'm just going to change this object to be a star, this empty object. Once again, like any object, I have to make sure it appears in the axis I want it to appear in. I'll select it to appear for every act for simplicity. And now I have a star I can collect, but where will I go? Well, I'll go back to the painting that leads to the level that replaces Bottom Battlefield. That's just what the game defaults to. But I want to change where I go after I collect this star. I want to go to my hub world, which I made that purple cube that's Castle Grounds. So, you do that by messing around with these warps right here. This is the warp, the warp connection that determines where you go after successfully collecting a star. This is the one that determines where you go when you die in your level. So, I'm going to change where I go after collecting a star. You'll notice that the source warp ID is 240. It's important that you don't change this. This number is important. What you change is the destination. So, as I said, I want to go to Castle Grounds, which is my purple cube. It's my hub world. Here it is. But my destination warp ID, you might be thinking I can just set it to my Mario Start 1 warp object, but I can't. I need to set a special warp object for something like this. So let me go to Castle Grounds and place it before I do anything else. So here I am, Castle Grounds. I'll edit my area. So after collecting a star, there's only specific warp objects you can go to. Oops, didn't mean to rotate that. There's only specific warp objects you can successfully go to. If I chose to try and go to Warp Mario Start 1, things just wouldn't work out at all. So I'll create a new warp object. And warp level exit will work. There's other things that will work, like warp level exit from hole, but I'll select warp level exit. So, like anything else, I have to give this an ID. I'll make it have an ID of 45. Sorry, like anything else, I meant like any other warp object. All warp objects need to have IDs, which is like their name. So I'll set it to be 45. I want to make sure that it actually saves the 45, so I'll try and hit enter, make it flash green. It can be kind of finicky, but I'll come back to that and see if it works. Anyways, now I have to create a warp connection. But first I should create the warp connection from the other place. So let me save this and go back to the place that has the star in it that I want to edit where I spawn after I collect the star. So, Bottom's Battlefield, Area 2 is where my star is. So as I determined, I want, when I collect the star, to go to my Castle Grounds place, and I just set a warp level exit object that had an ID of 45. So 45 is what I want to be in here. And now I'll save. And that's the first step. Now after collecting the star, I should go to Castle Grounds, and I should go to my object that's a warp level exit object with an ID of 45. But yeah, there's one last step. I have to go back to the place that I want to spawn in, my place with the warp level object. Let me just check to make sure that's been behaving and that its ID is still 45. Okay, it does appear to be. So now if I go to warps, the warp connection place, I need to create an extra warp because this is a special kind of warp, the one that takes you out of a level after collecting a star. It requires one extra step. I actually had to create a new connection and I had to put in to both the source warp ID and the destination warp ID, the ID for my warp level exit object, which is 45. See, right here, its ID is 45. So, the last step, I just have to, whoops, let me select it again to get the right stuff to appear down here. I have to put down 45 and 45. So if I save, I should have everything working out. So let me just summarize what I did in case it was a little confusing. First, I went to my bottom battlefield area 2. This is the place that I put a star in, and I want to make it so that after I collect that star, I'll spawn somewhere else. I want to spawn in my hub world. So, this is my star, and the first step I took was to go to this warp's connection place. So the first step was changing where I go to after collecting a star. I decided to go to this destination warp ID 45, which is that special object, the warp level exit object, in my castle grounds. So going back into my castle grounds, you'll see that here is my warp level exit that had the ID of 45. So this is going to be where I spawn to after collecting that star in the bottom battlefield level, area 2. I'll spawn right here at the warp level exit, which is at, oh, I forgot to set it to appear at all X, very important. Anyways, I'll spawn right here after collecting that star in that other place, this warp level exit with an ID of 45 in my castle grounds. The final step that I just did a little bit ago was creating one more warp connection and setting both the warp ID source and the destination warp ID both to be the ID of that warp level exit object. So after that summary, let me go in and see if everything works as intended. Alright, so here I am back in my emulator. If I select my save file, yep, as I said before, I spawn in my level that replaces castle grounds. So here I go into my level, bottom battlefield, from my hub world. Now I'm going to go to that place where the star was, which was from this warp hole. Here we go. So if all the steps I've taken so far worked correctly, collecting this star should take me back to my hub world, which was the level replacing castle grounds. So I collected. You'll see that, ta-da! The camera's all messed up, but I actually went back to my hub world, this purple cube right here. So you can see, here I am back in my hub world. I can jump back into my level to take myself back to bottom battlefield, the place that replaced it. Or I could go to some other pipe that I could have placed to go to some other level. So excellent, I have a working hub world. But there's one last thing I want to show you. What if you don't actually want to start spawning in the place that either is castle grounds, or in my case, the place that's replacing castle grounds? Because when you first load your save file, by default you load into the castle grounds area. But yeah, what if I just want to, right off the bat, spawn in my bottom battlefield level? Well, let me show you how to do just that. So what you'll need is a hex editor. I just use HXD, which is what I think a lot of people use. And I'll just launch it. So you may think that this is pretty intimidating, but it's incredibly simple, this thing I'm going to show you. There will be a lot of numbers, but there's only a single one I have to edit, so it's really not bad at all. So first I just have to open up my ROM, which is right here. You'll see that there's a bunch of numbers, but don't worry about them. I'm literally only going to change a single little grouping of numbers in this entire thing. So, all I have to do is click search, click go to, and in this box I type, in this offset place, I type 2A 6 2 2 7. And that will take me right to the place I want to be. So if I hit OK, you'll see it took me right to this little thing, this one thing that says 1-0. Believe it or not, that represents castle grounds, the place that you normally spawn at when you launch the game, when you launch a save file rather. But I want to change this. I want to make it so that I spawn at bottom battlefield. So what do I change this number to? Well, you can open Quad 64. You can just use any old ROM. I'll just use the same ROM I have been using. And you'll see if I click level, select level, there's all these levels here with all these little numbers next to them. What I need to do is choose the bottom battlefield one because yeah, I want to change where I spawn to be at bottom battlefield. So that's 0x09. Just pay attention to the part to the right of the X. 09. So if I go back to my hex editor, all I have to do is, instead of having this 10 at that place that I mentioned, I just put in 0, 9, I save it, boom, that's all I have to do in the text editor. Change literally only that, you're all set. It's not nearly as tough as you'd think it would be. So, I just made it so that I spawn at bottom battlefield, but you may remember something I said earlier, which is that the level that you initially spawn in after loading a save file, it doesn't use any of your warp objects to determine where to place you. It uses hard-coded coordinates. So the last step is to go back to ROM Manager, go to Level Manager. Whoops, sorry, I have to load my ROM first, of course. I load my ROM. And now bottom battlefield. So, as I said earlier, I need to change this default start position, because when Mario first loads in somewhere after just launching a save file, it uses the default start position instead of anywhere else. So I'll just go quickly into the editor to try and get a suitable location. I'll just select some random object, bring it up. It looks like the coordinates 0900 work just fine. So I'll just change the coordinates, the default start position in the area that I'm going to spawn in when I first load my save file, which I set to be bottom's battlefield in the hex editor. I just changed that now to 0, 900, 0. If I save and launch my ROM, you should see everything working just the way I intend. I just opened up my ROM in my emulator. So if I load my save file, you'll see it takes me immediately to bottom battlefield. And when I select an act, it will take me to those hard-coded coordinates that I just said. You'll see that, yay, I just spawned in bottom battlefield. So normally you spawn in Castle Grounds, but if you don't want to spawn in Castle Grounds, you can spawn wherever you want, just with that simple hex editor trick. So, if you want to change the location that you spawn in to be at your hub world, which is somewhere, some other level that you're overriding, that's how you do it. Alright, so before I go, I just wanted to cover a few final things. To start off with, I'll be putting that address in the description. You remember the hex editor? How I had to use this offset to a 6227? I'll be putting this number in the description, so you can easily just copy and paste it in here. And when you are using your hex editor, make sure that it's set to hex mode and this begin step is checked. So the next thing I wanted to bring up is whenever you do edit this value, just make sure that you back up your ROM. You should save a copy of it, because in case you do mess up, you won't really be able to recover things at all. Your save file, or sorry, your ROM itself will just kind of be destroyed. But if you save a copy of it, you'll be fine. I also just wanted to mention, here it is. The success warp, as I mentioned, you could use several different kinds of warps to set as the destination. One is the warp level exit. Another is, I believe, like warp painting exit. But for the failure one, the place that you want to warp to, if Mario perishes in your area, you have to set that to a slightly different kind of warp. It's a similar idea, they're just called something slightly different. Oops, let me just click on empty object. So if I go back to where the warps are, I have to set it to something like warp level exit restore life, or warp painting exit failure right here. Because when Mario perishes and gets booted out of the level, his health is at 0, But it's actually these warps that restore his life back up, so if you don't use the correct one, he'll just stay at 0 health and your game will softlock. So if you're trying to make Mario go somewhere after he dies, make sure to use one of those. In case my wording throughout the tutorial was a little confusing when I said when you first load a save file, what I meant to say was just anytime you load a save file. So yeah, you have to set those hard-coded coordinates because anytime you load your save file, it relies on that. And the last thing I wanted to say was a shout-out. I wanted to shout out several people from the Simple Flips Discord for helping me along the way. Most notably, Mr. Commit helped a lot with helping me understand the success and failure warps. And Cheesepin mentioned how to actually set the hex editor thing so you could spawn in a different level entirely. Well, anyways, that's all I have for now. Hope you're having a fantastic night.